Today's title is Waiting for Superman. And I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a confession. It was a little bit of a challenge after doing the series on the principles of coming up what I was going to talk about, because for months and months it was just look at the list, and it was the sixth principle, it was the seventh principle. So Pam asked me, she said, what is your sermon going to be about? And I thought about a figure that we're going to get to in a few minutes, and I said, let's talk about waiting for Superman. So, to get to where I wanted to go with the idea of Superman, I'm going to ask you to come back with me to the summer of 1983. So in the summer of 1983, I was 9 years old. And at this time, my family in 1981, I believe, had moved to Huntsville, Alabama. And when I was at home in Alabama with my parents, one of the things that we did not do very much was go to the movies. During the summers, I would go back up to Philadelphia, and when in Philadelphia, in the summer of '82, I got to go see E.T. the Extraterrestrial, and I got to see Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan in 1982. And then in the summer of 1983, my family friend, his name was Gary Carr, he was a gentleman in his 20s, and he took me to see the movie Superman 3. And Superman 3 starred Christopher Reeve as Superman. It also included Richard Pryor as one of the bad guys in that particular movie. And Harry asked me this before we started the service. This was really my introduction to Superman. I didn't meet Superman through the comic books. I met Superman through the Christopher Reeve movies. And that's how I met Superman. And in this particular movie, Superman has all kinds of conflicts. I mentioned that Richard Pryor is in there, and there's a bad guy that entices Richard Pryor onto his team because Richard Pryor plays a tech genius. Superman extinguishes a fire in a chemical plant. He saves Colombia's coffee crops from a horrible storm that's being wreaked because of a weather satellite. And as the conflicts continue to escalate, Superman faces this unprecedented challenge where he's split into two selves, and there's a bad Superman and a good Superman, and Superman has to fight himself. And this epic battle unfolds in a junkyard with the evil Superman repeatedly getting the upper hand on the good Superman, who is actually looking a lot like Clark Kent at the time. And in this struggle between light and darkness, Superman grapples not only with external threats, but also with his own inner demons. And the question becomes, can he overcome the malevolent forces that are himself? He does. He saves the day, because Superman always saves the day. And that's what I loved about Superman as a kid. It was a great movie. And it gave me great content, and it made me a wonderful storyteller back in Alabama on the playgrounds, because lots of people hadn't seen Superman. So Superman was very valuable. And the 9-year-old in me grabbed on tightly to the idea that Superman could come and save the day. And it became a very large thread in my fantasy land and my intellectual fabric that there was a Superman and he could save the day. Now, 9 years later, we get to 1992, and I'm shipped off from high school to boot camp in the United States Navy, and I'm down in San Diego, California. And I don't know if I had figured it out quite yet by then, but that's when I really began to realize there was no Superman coming and I was going to be on my own. And I had to figure out that boot camp journey and everything that's come since on my own. And to be honest, I was uncertain about the challenge that lied ahead in boot camp. I wasn't sure if anybody had ever successfully made it through boot camp because it was kind of hard compared to the life that I had as a kid. And I didn't have anything to look forward to. But then I started to think about Superman was a metaphor. And in that metaphor, it kind of represents us as humans. We often have a longing for external solution and for someone to fix our problem. And I'm going to ask Pam to bring up the slide of our fourth principle, because it started to make me think about our fourth principle. And our fourth principle in Unitarian Universalism is that we affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And so now we have to fast forward another 20 years, and I have a nephew, and his name is Max. And Max sends me a message, and it introduces me to a video about a gentleman just talking. He was out on a run, and he was talking about a book that he had just written, and his name was David Goggins. And this is how I came to the idea for the sermon, because will you put up the post from Facebook? On Facebook, there's a post going around right now. If you guys didn't know, this is the post. It's February, and it's Black History Month, and some people are putting up a post that says, retired Chief Petty Officer David Goggins is the only person ever to complete U.S. Army Ranger Training School, U.S. Air Force Tactical Control Party Training, and U.S. Navy SEAL training. Each of these individual programs are nearly impossible to complete. He not only completed each of the trainings, but served honorably, completing numerous contract combat missions in each capacity. And it goes on to say that David Goggins is an American hero and should be celebrated as a part of Black History Month. So I had seen this post, and Pam asked me what I was going to speak to you about today, and I said I'm going to speak about Superman. So going back to when I was a kid, Superman is this fictitious figure who doesn't exist. And then my nephew Max introduces me to David Goggins, and just to get a reading of the room, does anybody know who David Goggins is right now? Nobody. Okay, so one, I have to make sure I don't channel too much of my inner David Goggins, because his mouth is really dirty and salty. He uses a lot of what they call four-letter words. So we're going to try to keep, it might have to do with he was in the Navy and I was in the Navy, and they start to sound like really resonant and familiar to when I was in boot camp. So David Goggins is typically regarded as the hardest, baddest ass man on earth. There's no one that is willing to put up a challenge, because any challenger that comes forward, he shall take down. And so let's get the next picture. I want to tell you about what his first book is about. He has 2 books out there. In the first book, I was introduced to him. He talks about his life. This is David Goggins now, and this is David Goggins before he entered the United States Navy. And as you can see, there's an extreme transformation. And one of the things that people really love about David Goggins is he never stopped being a Navy SEAL. And what I mean by that is he never stopped running 25 miles a day with a pack on his back and doing 400 push-ups. He said he thought that was a way of life, and he looks at lots of other Navy SEALs who, quote unquote, retire as being soft. And that gets back to the hardest man in the world. And so my nephew introduces me to David Goggins, and for me, what David Goggins did was see potential possibility in the human condition. He does truly superhuman feats. And I'm going to tell you some of this from memory, so if it's not exactly factually correct, just know that it was written down factually correct on this notebook and that I could tell it all to you. The first time he went and ran a marathon, he just decided that he was going to run a marathon. And he didn't train. I know lots of people who run marathons. They have books and charts, and they do training for weeks and months before, and he decided he was going to go out and run a marathon. And this guy stopped at the CVS. He bought like some Ritz crackers, a couple of Red Bulls, and a Powerade, and went and ran a 26-mile marathon. And that was the beginning of his journey. He's run 100-mile races. He's run 200-mile races. He's run 300-mile races. He was formerly in the Guinness World Book of Records for doing over 4,000 pull-ups, over 4,000 pull-ups in a 17-hour period. He did it in 17 hours, 4,040 pull-ups, I believe he did. And so extreme physical accomplishments that before I read the book, I had heard of an ultra marathon. I know a marathon is 26.2 miles. I didn't know that there were people out there that were going and running 300 miles at one time in one sitting for any purpose, period. but it's about possibilities, the search for truth and meaning. And what David Goggins challenges in putting the pictures out about how he used to look and how he looks now is that there is limitless possibility within us. When he runs the 100-mile race, he tells this elaborate story about he technically broke both of his legs and finished the race on broken legs. And people get really angry at him because he does these extreme things. He put a picture on Instagram where his toenail had fallen off. That happens to a lot of marathoners. That's why I don't run that far. But people were really upset, and he said, do you think being hard and being great looks like peaches and whipped cream all the time? And then he reposted the picture and said, this is what it looks like. So now, in the idea of the fictitious comic book Superman and this character I've introduced you to named David Goggins, who shows us the power and potential of the human capacity, in our search for truth and meaning as individuals, we have to be able to push and challenge ourselves. And this community right now is in its own collective search for truth and meaning as to who we are and what we do and where we're going from here. And so David Goggins is an invitation to, one, internally tap into our truly superhuman capacities. And I invite you, if you can handle the language, to listen to some of the speeches that he gives. He's on Instagram, he's on YouTube, he's all over social media. May we leave here today not wanting for a Cape Crusader, but ready to adjust, recalibrate, and stay after it to become better somehow. Our sermon title could have been Embracing Our Inner Goggins Beyond Waiting for Superman, as we seek to find truth and meaning in both our individual lives and this lovely spiritual community. We can be inspired by the film characters from Superman, but I see the badassness from David Goggins, and we need to run 100 miles. And when we need to do 10 pull-ups, I don't want us to look out to the fictitious Superman. We're challenged to continue to define ourselves as a faith community here at the UUFLB. And the question is, who are we? And are we waiting for Superman? And now we're going to do our closing hymn, number 1007, There is a River Flowing in My Soul. So please stand if you're comfortable in mind, body, and spirit.